Eileen asked me the other day what my title was. I'm like, what? I'm supposed to have a title. We stopped doing that. Is it last a couple years ago? The home office just would tell us what we were talking about. And I remember back in the day where I always had to send Reverend Tanya the title, long time before I knew what I was talking about. And at some point I thought, well, I'll tell her, I can tell her anything because I'm going to talk about whatever comes out of my mouth.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Okay, same thing.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to come back home here in this moment. When Stanley said we were talking about coming back to the basics, I used to love January throughout our tradition for years. We would always come back to the basics, which for us in this movement was looking at the first 4 chapters of Ernest Holmes' textbook, The Science Mind. And for me, the basics always have been just what this teaching is. We want to make it more, we want to go off in this direction, talk about this, but really spiritual practice in all traditions are really just about the basic, the one source, call it what you will. I remember the first time I came into a center of religious science back in 1990 down in Santa Rosa, and I had never belonged to a church before. And I had been in Eastern teaching and practice. I had started out in high school studying transcendentalism, interestingly enough, a foundation of where we come from as a movement. And I had had these deep felt experiences and showings of the wholeness, the connectedness, the oneness. And I came into the community in Santa Rosa not looking for a church, not looking for a new teaching, but invited in for community. Somebody said, oh, you'll like these people, you should go listen to them. And I sat down, and the minister then, Reverend Mary Murray Shelton, started talking about the thing itself, the first chapter, the basic of our teaching, really the ground of being, the teaching, the thing itself. And she spent her whole talk talking about the one consciousness, the one intelligence, the one source, the one ground of being. And the more she wove this understanding, I could feel that presence of life that I had experienced in my Eastern practice, in the things that had been open before me. And I never left after that. I'm grateful that we're going back to the basics because, as I said, we can stray. Do any of you stray off course from the basic? You know, that thing itself really is what is. I was listening to a minister on a recording the other day talking about, well, God is all there is, and then I am one with God. And I thought, there's the split right there. Step 2 of prayer. I am all that God is, which is a slight shift on God is all that I am. And so today I want to come back to not only what we call the basics, but that foundation of the teaching in which I think we want to jump out and work the world and get our life nicer, don't we? So often we come into these centers because we want our lives to be nicer. And we spend so little time dwelling in that understanding. There's only one, and it's fully present right here. Last night I went and hung out with a group of friends of mine that were grounded in spiritual practice. Well, when we are. And we're very politically oriented. And there was all these stirrings and these feelings that were getting expressed. And this morning I woke up And I thought, what is it I'm talking about? As a movement, we used to talk about God is all there is. We're just praying. We're just working consciousness. And I really, truly believe that. That's really what I'm going to talk about. We're only working consciousness. We're only praying. At some point in our movement, people started feeling unsettled and started wondering, well, what about the world? Because the world is, stirred and stirring. And how do they relate? And we can't just sit around and talk God stuff and feel God stuff and feel good and ignore our world. Danny just sang in his song, the words come back to us. They show us. You know, the second chapter in the textbook is the thing, how it works. I think that's the second chapter. How it works. It works through our thinking. And so when Ernest Holmes came in and started developing this teaching from his deep abiding experience of oneness, talking to a faith-based community, Christians, Jewish people, coming to find something deeper than what they were hearing in their churches and synagogues. He talked about how do we as people live these teachings that we hear in church. Because it's one thing to go in and pray and turn it all over to the infinite. What do we do then when we go home? And so he started talking about, what we're thinking and how we think and live in our lives makes a difference. We can't just say God's going to handle this and then go home and act our old ways. Old ways, yeah. Some people act the sway of old ways. What am I thinking into my life? The third chapter in the textbook is what it does. And so often I hear ministers talk about what it does is it reflects back to us. It brings us our good, is what I hear ultimately. It answers our prayers. But Ernest Holmes never really said that. What he said was life itself, what's happening in your world, is reflecting back what's in our consciousness, both as individuals and as a collective human species. So I can make my little patch of the earth nice. But what's happening in this country, in the world, is happening in our consciousness. Our work is to come back to that basic thing itself and allow it to inform us. I've said before, we don't just look to, where's my love, and reach out to love and get more positive. In fact, this movement is not a positive thinking movement at all. It's based on, as Ernest Holmes says, in prayer, speaking absolute truth to condition. It's not denying the conditions. It's not pretending the world is nice. It's bringing the conditions home and then shifting ourselves. The only thing we are asked to shift is what is happening in our consciousness. That's it.
Yes.
Very simple, very basic, sometimes challenging. Is it challenging to you? How do I stand in truth in the face of hatred and division, of greed, of separation, of fighting? Well, the simple answer to that is I stop and look at, where am I fighting? Where am I grasping my good? Where am I separating? Where am I pointing fingers? Where am I thinking negative about anybody? Where am I holding a story that isn't based on the absolute truth? We're really bringing the light of consciousness to what's happening in us. Now, being a spiritual practitioner, and that's what we really are, it's not about just sitting in your room in resolving back into peace and then doing nothing. It's allowing that opens within us to move us, because that is always moving us. It's created us to uniquely express in our world. So ours that is to express is that which is ours to express. Singers sing and dancers dance and writers write and teachers teach. And the revolutionaries of the world, people with visions, stand out and march, stand up against that feels unjust and uninclusive. But first we have to resolve back, where am I excluding in my own consciousness? Because prayer isn't about fixing the world. I hear so often, and it's not wrong to look at what our wants and desires are, what's calling in our hearts. I really want a nicer home, or I need a job, or I would like some love in my life. But we don't have to tell the infinite what our desires are, because it's right here, being us, calling to us, informing us. And as we're trained as practitioners, we're not here necessarily, I'm not praying for the other person. I'm shifting my place in consciousness to know truth. And I'm not praying about the job in the car in the driveway, although we do. I'm not praying about the love life. I'm not praying about the conditional world. I'm not praying to change other people. I'm called home to, no kidding, resolve myself back into that truth and to allow it to inform me and walk through me in what's mine truly to know and do. Ernest Holmes said, we're not here to save the world, but pray every day. Mm-hmm. And when he talked about prayer, he wasn't talking about those throwaway, oh, I have nice thoughts about them, oh, I'm blessing them. He's talking about what in you is showing up as this. This is a man who lived through world wars, who lived through the Cold War, who knew as a human species we could blow ourselves off the planet. He literally said that, oh, that would be too bad. Life itself, that one source, will go on. What are you recognizing as your ground of being? Because I know in myself, and I've done some practice, and I've had some amazing experiences of the wholeness and the oneness of life. I know that my human idea and stories can react. And I'm not even inviting you not to react. As Ernest Holmes says, meet your reaction and listen. What is wanting to be known here? People are angry. Meet the anger. People are wanting. Meet the want. And as we are trained as practitioners, look at what is really wanting to be known. Because as much as I hear people's wants and desires, likings and dislikings, when I sit with people and have them really investigate within, people don't come up with, well, if I just had a better house, or if this person would just act better, my life would be better. What people really want to know is that they're one with the one, that they're held, that they're a part of, that they're not an accident. To really listen, what am I made of really? That doesn't necessarily keep us from having pain. It doesn't make wars necessarily end, but it is the transformation that all spiritual teachers talked about. It's radical to really shift and walk from that greater knowing. Right now, some of you might be aware of the 24 monks. I think there are 23 of them right now. The old monk who was old, finally went home, because these people are walking, these monks dedicated to peace, embodied in peace, are walking 2,300 miles from Fort Worth, Texas to DC. They're following the trail of the freedom riders back during the civil rights. They're walking through the deep south and they're walking and teaching peace. The monk that talks every time they stop and have their lunch breaks and their dinner breaks, he'll give a really brief lesson on mindfulness. And he'll say, we are walking to awaken the peace that already dwells within each of us. That's prayer. That doesn't mean everything's all peaceful. That doesn't mean we necessarily get what we want. But it shifts what we are emanating and bringing into the world. It's radical. We've never really tried truly being peace. I have things that I'm not liking about what's happening in our world. And I've railed not only against what's happening in the world, I rail about my community. It's like, come on, people, let's get back to that basic truth of being. Ernest Holmes was not teaching a teaching for the future. It wasn't when you die, you'll go to heaven. It wasn't when you get your demonstration, you'll be happy. The truth, what we're praying is what's really right here. Underneath the rift in our consciousness, the division in our consciousness, the resistance in our consciousness, the hatred or the objections in our consciousness, the judgment, what is always right here? Because if you stop right now and recognize you are living in this moment and you dwell there, you recognize that you never leave to get to the future. There is no next moment. You with me? Mm-hmm. Right here, there is no there where God's going to show up or peace is going to show up. We're called to be this. Now, it seems to be a piece of work for us as humans to resolve back into peace. It's why we come back to the center again and again. It's why we keep praying. In fact, when Ernest Holmes taught the creative process of how our thoughts move through our subconscious, through the law and creates, he wasn't setting out a path of getting what we want. In fact, he said we don't necessarily get what we want. We can't even know our highest good because we cannot see the highest. We cannot see the allness that's unfolding even right now in this world. But we can come home to this moment. We can look again. Now, I have prescriptions in my mind. This is my confessional. I have judgments. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. I have them. I have a prescription. I could write it out for all of us. Oh, well, that's my own rift. That's my own judgment. What is the truth right here? To so immerse ourselves in the presence that the presence just becomes us. Ernest Holmes, and I've said this to you many, many times, he said throughout his teaching, throughout the textbook, his early writing, he said, we practice far too little. So when he was talking about that creative process, first you think your thought or you pray your prayer, and the law moves through and it manifests. He didn't say, then rejoice in your manifestation or go back and make it happen. He said, you have your experience of your manifestation, of what's showing and reflecting back to you. Go back to prayer and pray again. And it comes down to what's before you and go back to prayer. What he was inviting us to is to live in prayer, to pray no matter what, to pray in all things. Not as a nice prescription of I'm separate from the world, but how do I recognize the world as myself and bring forth the purest, clearest part of what's truly the source of my being? I remember years ago, I had this neighbor who, she was going through this physical challenge. And she was scared, and she'd come over and knock on my door, and she'd have tears in her eyes and say, "Can you take me to the emergency room?" And I did this a couple of times with her. She had gotten herself so isolated in life, and she had cut off all her friendships because she had so much judgment about what people were doing and not doing, that she was so alone. And I would take her to the emergency room, and they'd say, "There's nothing wrong with your oxygen. Breathe." And they would offer to do tests on her, and she'd get so scared, and she'd go, "No, no, 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 I have to leave." And so she was sitting on my couch after one of these visits, and they had offered her a medication that might help relax her. And she goes, I said, "Well, what if you just tried the medication?" And her response was to yell at me and stomp her feet on my floor and say, "I'm pure. I only put pure in my body." And what I recognized is that she didn't see that what she was filled up with was not purity, but her judgment and her fear and her anger. It's not an incrimination of who she was. So when we notice we're having a judgment or a feeling, or we're saying words that don't seem like they're in alignment with wholeness, if we just look and see what is wanting to be known here, what's in the way, what's impure in me that's then showing up in life. Surely there are things to be done. Some of us may pick up our robes and walk 2,300 miles. Some of us may go stand in the line of fire and even give our life. But we're all called. But first of all, we're called home. First and foremost, we're called to recognize and resolve back in that peace that is beyond human understanding, beyond human injustice, beyond human conditions. To resolve back into peace and allow that greater knowing to inform us and unfold through us. Because what I know is we're all called here, or else we wouldn't be here. Life is not my good. Life is what I am. It's all that is right here. And it's showing up uniquely through each one of us. On the way up here this morning, I was thinking back on the American dream. I've always had a little bit of a problem with the American dream that sets us apart from that we should be the ones. And then I thought about Martin Luther King and his dream. It's like, what is your dream? What is it based on? Is it based on me and my good? Or is it based on there's one world? Martin Luther King talked about the inescapable web of life of which we are all a part. Am I living that dream? Am I walking in that understanding? Or am I holding on to my story, my fear, my doubt, my wants, all that human separate stuff? Not trying to not be human, but to recognize that call home into being. We call this prayer. So I invite you to turn within. The only turn we are invited in all spiritual practices, that turn to that one presence. Recognizing that is the life of all life. The one source, the one creator, the one substance, the one essence of all that there is. It is that holds all in its embrace, this entire universe, every particle, every planet, every life expression, animated by this one, unfolding in this one, an integral part, one tapestry, one divine stream, right here. I simply come home. I turn within to recognize that wholeness of being beyond human prescriptions of this and that, beyond all perceptions and human mental knowing. There is that is only and always right here, fully abiding. And and we take a moment to abide. I recognize this as that gives me life, that expresses as my unique expression. And I allow the mental dust to settle, knowing that we are all held in this one presence. We are all made of and from this one presence. We are each a thread in this one divine tapestry, each a particle in this divine stream of life. We take a moment to melt into that stream, to allow the quieting of the thoughts and the disturbances and the graspings and the resistance to simply settle down, to open to that vista, that wholeness of being that is always here. The peace beyond human understanding, that divine love that is beyond human emotion and feeling. It simply is life being life. And it is calling us home, uniquely and together. As a human species, it is calling us home, inviting us to see and live in that greater harmony of all life. To live that organic livingness that is for the highest and good of all, beyond what we humanly know. We listen. We allow this presence to be that guides and directs. And we do it moment by moment, step by step. As the monks invite us, breath by breath, to simply bring us back into that awareness of the one. That awareness of the nowness, the here-ness that is life, right here, fully present. Beyond all human experience, it is that source, that ground of being that holds us like the earth holds us. And so I recognize this as the truth beyond the human condition. And I open to feel this warm embrace, this presence that guides and directs me in thought and word and action. And I return again and again to this awareness of that guides and directs me by thought and word and action. Always holding me, even in my stumbling, in my seeming forgetting, in my outbursts, in my opinions. It calls me home to that home of being that is always right here. And so I know this for myself in this human expression. And I know this for each and every one of us, those that hear this word and beyond. I simply know this and hold this here as that walks with me and through me and as me. It steadies me. For it is the one truth. It is the one source. It is the one life. I am so grateful to know this. I am so grateful for this opportunity to simply come home. Resting, marinating in this warm knowing, in this deep abiding experience of what is. I simply let go into this awareness. I surrender my life into that divine embrace. And I simply let this be. And so it is.
And so it is.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.